This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Can you have too much of a good thing? G.F. Newman is a fine award-winning writer, but was his multi-stranded Radio 4 drama, The Corrupted, full of sex and violence, suitable for 2:15 on half-term afternoons? And was it worth 7 hours of airtime over just 2 weeks? Some listeners think not.
I think it's indefensible to put on a drama that runs over 10 consecutive afternoon drama slots. The afternoon drama slot is for standalone drama.
Radio 4's drama commissioner tells us why he decided to run all 10 parts back-to-back.
I think it's great to give a writer of the stature of Gordon Newman the space, the size of canvas, to tell it's an epic story. And we like epic stories on Radio 4.
Also in feedback this week, a new series on women in broadcasting, past and present. Where are all the strong, authoritative female role models? Well, here's one.
If you can't help other women, then you really should. I think probably be genuinely quite ashamed if the world has been good to you, as it has to me.
The one and only Jane Garvey. And here are 2 Bob Harris's.
Tracks from 2 of my favourite re-release labels. I've already played this track, Vito first of all, and Ace. First of all,
why fans of Whispering Bob were hearing double for nearly 20 minutes. Are they all asleep at Radio 2? First, The Corrupted, which some listeners fear their children could be if they listen to G.F. Newman's multi-part radio drama. Mr. Newman is best known for his TV series Law and Order back in the late 70s, and more recently for Judge John Deed. But over the last 2 weeks, it's the radio adaptation of a part of his epic novel Crime and Punishment that has dominated Radio 4's airwaves. The drama covers the lives of a family caught up in the criminal underworld of the East End of London in the 1950s. It stars former East Ender Ross Kemp, hardly the shy and retiring type. It's tough stuff. Here's a taste, and those of a sensitive nature might want to put their hands over their ears.
Thank you, I had a shave this morning. You look like you could do with one. Here it is for you. Now sling your up, before I give you a matching stripe on the other side of your boat.
As I said, strong stuff and inescapable, because for the last 2 weeks the series has taken over the daily afternoon drama slot on Radio 4, normally a forum for one-off plays. Some feedback listeners have been riveted, but many more think it's all too much.
My name is Bob Tomlinson from Nelson in Lancashire. I listened with growing disgust to this cheerless yarn detailing, in last Friday's episode, all too graphic army brutality and breaking the spirit of a hapless squaddy. Have I done something wrong to be subjected to this treatment with no escape except the off button?
Hi, this is Roger Bramwell speaking. Without doubt, this was the finest drama I've heard for a long while. And this play was like being transported back in time. References to Freddie Mills, prefabricated housing, diner doors. Really, as a piece of social history, this was totally spot on.
My name is Stephanie Douglas. I think it's indefensible to put on a drama that runs over 10 consecutive afternoon drama slots. I think you would have done better to have commissioned 10 new standalone dramas, and I think this is definitely needed, because at the moment there are so many repeats.
Hello, I'm Camilla Curti. The classic serial is Evelyn Waugh's Sword of Honour trilogy, which is obviously 3 books being done in 7 parts. So compared with 1 book in 10 parts, I think that's interesting.
In view of those concerns, we called in for questioning Radio 4's commissioning editor for drama, Jeremy Howe. He did not ask to be accompanied by his solicitor, but he did have a minder with him. Having switched on the recorder, I got straight to the point. Why did he decide that G.F. Newman's drama needed to be run every weekday for 2 weeks?
Well, I think when a writer of the stature of G.F. Newman says to you he'd like to write an epic saga about crime and criminality in post-war Britain, you think, yes, well, this is probably worth quite a lot of space. I mean, we thought long and hard about it. It is the first time we've done this, and it's an experiment, and we're interested to know whether it worked or not. but it's so story-driven that I think it's certainly compelling enough to be listened to day by day by day.
But Camilla Curtis says, yes, but you only gave Evelyn Waugh's Sword of Honour, which were, after all, 3 books. You only gave that, I think, 7 parts. You've given G.F. Newman 10, and she says that's an imbalance, surely. Well,
actually, in terms of the hours of output, it's roughly the same. I was at Channel 4 when they commissioned the Sword of Honour for television, and they did it in 4 hours, and I thought they massacred it, actually. I wasn't a fan. I think the scope of G.F. Newman's story, it's actually bigger in terms of its time than the Sword of Honour. There are more pages in Gordon Newman's Crime and Punishment, which he hasn't really adapted. It's a spin on that novel, than there are in the 3 volumes of the wonderful Sword of Honour.
Before we talk about the plays themselves, if we could hold on that decision to give up 10 slots, because as some of our listeners point out, that in effect is 10 one-hour dramas that won't get made.
It's not a sacrifice. I mean, it's just a slight shift in editorial policy. Rest assured, next week there are 5 single plays.
Yeah, but 10
Radio 4 commission more single dramas than any other broadcaster on the planet, probably in the universe. We commission more single plays than any theatre you can think of. On an average year, I reckon in the afternoon drama slot alone, we commission 120 plus single plays.
But I don't think anybody is questioning your commitment to single plays, but it is a fact that by giving one piece of work 10 episodes, where normally there are 10 plays of 1 episode, some things don't get made that could have been made.
Yeah, that's true, but you have to make a choice. And personally, I think it's great to give a writer of the stature of Gordon Newman the space, the size of his canvas, to tell it's an epic story. And we like epic stories on Radio 4.
There is a difficulty, though, isn't there? Because it's very unlikely, to say the least, that anyone will listen to all of the episodes. People's lives just don't allow them to do that often. They may listen to a large number of them, but the chance of anybody being able to listen to all 10 is not great, is it?
No, I do take that point. I mean, we do have various devices to allow you in, like listen again, etc., etc. And that's quite a good reason for keeping it in a condensed way, so that it's available for a listener to catch up in a way that it wouldn't be if we'd played it out over 10 weeks.
And just on that question, somebody wrote to us, Tim Reed, saying that he thought the series, by the way, was wonderful, and he said he made a point of catching up on The Corrupted using iPlayer. Do you have any research which tells you whether more people are now doing that, catching up on iPlayer?
Yes, they are, but the huge majority of the listening for Radio 4 is done in real time. And I think the other thing I'd say about, though it is a serial, I think it's very easy to kind of zone in to where the story is if you haven't heard the previous 3 episodes.
So you felt
and
that
I think it's good, compelling, pulls you in very fast storytelling. I mean, I think the listening experience across all 10 is probably richer than one here, one there, one the other. But I still think it's a good listen to each individual 45 minutes.
Can we look at the content then? There are lots of people praising it, lots of people disturbed by the level of sex and violence, and some, like Monica Witherington, finding it particularly difficult to understand why you've put this on at half-term.
I was so shocked by the level of violence and the bad language, not to mention a very explicit seduction scene, and all within the space of about 15 minutes. But even more important, last week and this week, the children are off school, and I really wouldn't like to think that any young child might have accidentally tuned in to this kind of adult material.
Do you normally respect, as it were, half-terms?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think the subject matter is challenging. It is tough. It is rough. But if you call something G.F. Newman's The Corrupted, I think you're already aware of the territory. I'd just like to read you the opening announcement on presentation for episode 1. Now on Radio 4, our afternoon play, G.F. Newman's tough and uncompromising new drama series set in 1950s Britain in a criminal world.
In a criminal world driven by sex, prejudice, and above all, money. With language and attitudes to match, Ross Kemp tells the story of how one family is determined to succeed in post-war Britain, no matter what the cost.
We don't want to ambush the audience. We want to set out the stall very fast. So the trails, the title, the presentation announcements, and the fact that you get into the world very, very quickly signals what the drama's about.
And what makes a man kill? What makes him a criminal, or a copper for that matter?
But there's always the possibility, notwithstanding you making every effort to warn the audience, that some people will come in late. And I think the question here from Monica Witherington is, in view of the fact that children are likely to be more available, as it were, or in the kitchen or wherever it is the radio is on, during half-term, shouldn't you just not put this sort of play on at that time?
I mean, school holidays account for somewhere in the region of a third of the year, so that would very much limit what we are able to do if we were to strictly stick to that. And I think Roger Marnie's been on the show, our compliance editor, explaining the policy behind it. I've got nothing much more to add, except for this is an adult-orientated audience network. And, of course, if the audience don't like what they're hearing, and I really want them to like what they're hearing, they're free to switch off or switch over. I mean, while we've been running The Corrupted, we've been running the antidote to The Corrupted on 4Extra and been training it, which is Adrian Mole.
But, of course, The Corrupted just covers one aspect of G.F. Newman's book, Crime and Punishment. Will there be more weeks of the afternoon drama given over to other works drawn from Crime and Punishment?
I don't know. The jury's out on that. I think we want to get the network wants to get a sense of how it's played out, and I need to sit down with G.F. Newman and the producer and work out if there's more gas in the tank.
But creatively, you think it's a success?
I think it's a pretty exciting prospect. I think it's a very good piece of storytelling. Whether or not it's worked, we don't know yet.
The audience figures will decide.
Audience figures, audience reaction, how we feel it went, whether or not there's enough story left to continue the saga. All those things we'll take into consideration. But I'm proud that we've commissioned and played out in 10 consecutive episodes something which is painted on such a big canvas. I think it's a good thing to do.
Radio 4's commissioning editor for drama, Jeremy Howe. Now, to what for many has been a delightful surprise, and for others a grave lowering of standards.
Please welcome this year's BBC Wreath Lecturer, Grayson Perry.
This year's Wreath Lectures are, of course, being delivered by the artist Grayson Perry, and they and he have continued to divide opinion amongst feedback listeners. We're now 3/4 of the way through his series of talks on modern art, and these listeners are all hooked.
My name is Sheila Cummins from Wallington in Surrey. Listening to feedback, I've been roused to comment, for the first time in a very long Radio 4 listening history, on the choice of Grayson Perry for this year's Wreath Lectures. I think it was an inspired choice. He's brilliant. He's intuitive and empathetic, and above all, entertaining.
And if you think about it, all the things that were once seen as subversive and dangerous, like tattoos and piercings and drugs and interracial sex, fetishism, all these things, they sort of crop up on X Factor now on a Saturday night, on family viewing.
David Hewitt. I would just like to add my vote to those who think that this year's Wreath Lectures are the most entertaining and thought-provoking for many years. Grayson Perry has been an inspired choice of lecturer.
The one thing you won't see, though, underarm hair. The last truly dangerous thing.
My name's Ruth. I've been so impressed and engaged with Grayson Perry's command of the Wreath Lectures. I find him inclusive, interesting, warm and funny. He's a lovely man who delivers a stealth intellectual punch of synthesised ideas. Brilliant. Well worth taking loo time off work to make sure I can listen closely without interruption.
Gregory Schenkman, on the other hand, isn't convinced by the lecturer's intellectual credentials.
I've listened to as much of Grayson Perry's Wreath Lectures as could hold my attention. I found Mr. Perry charming, sometimes amusing and almost always entertaining, but I found that his lectures lacked almost completely the intellectual heft which one would expect. Having Grayson Perry deliver the Wreath Lectures is rather like casting Tommy Cooper or Russell Brand in the role of Hamlet in a Shakespeare play.
So where do you stand on the great Perry debate? Do you favour the return of more conventional figures along the lines of previous lecturers like the historian Neil Ferguson or the Burmese politician Aung San Suu Kyi? Please let us know what you think, and next week we'll be putting your comments and questions to Mohit Bakaya, the commissioning editor for the Wreath Lectures. You can write to us at feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX, or leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. Or, of course, you can send an email to feedback@bbc.co.uk, All those details are on our website. Now for a subject much aired on Feedback, women on radio, primarily in front of the microphone. Has a glass ceiling been not only shattered, but completely removed?
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Sarah Montague and Michal Hussein.
On top of the appointment of Michal Hussein to Today back in July, we've just had confirmation that Rita Lashar is to become the main presenter of The World Tonight. At the same time, the Director-General of the BBC, Tony Hall, has announced his intention to have half of all BBC local radio breakfast shows presented, or at least co-presented, by women by the end of next year. So how did we get here, and is there now equality on the airwaves? One presenter for whom a brick wall, let alone industrially reinforced glass, would be no obstacle, is Jane Garvey. This week she's been fronting a 5-part series, Getting on Air, charting the history of women in broadcasting. I asked her whether anything in particular had surprised her during the making of the programmes.
I was quite surprised by that 1973 BBC internal report, which talked about, well, the classic phrase, menopausal tensions.
The Controller of Information Services would welcome a woman or two in Secretariat, but the main factor in his mind at the selection stage would be a woman's vulnerability to menopausal tension.
I was already at school, and the organisation that I would later work for, and in fact, very soon in my life wanted to work for desperately, was having these thoughts.
And there were others having different thoughts, because as the series brings out, from the beginning, and indeed under John Reith, women were appointed to almost the highest level in the BBC.
Well, I mean, Hilda Matheson, who is the first head of talks, is a really good early example of a woman in a very, very senior position. That is true, and you can't question that, but what we absolutely can question, and what this series has tried to do, is to work out why progress did happen, and then things appeared to stall or even go backwards.
And one of the things that is suggested in the programmes is that part of the problem were women listeners and viewers themselves, particularly listeners, who, it is said, did not like the sound of women being tough, authoritative and searching. Do you think that's true?
Well, everybody says that's what happened. It was certainly said that the reason that Nan Winton didn't last long reading the news on the BBC was that women had complained about her. What is certainly true from my own experience is that I worked for many years with a man, Peter Allen, on 5 Live. We co-presented a programme together, and he was allowed to be gladiatorial when he was interviewing politicians. He still is, thank goodness. When it was my turn to have what you might call a pop at a politician, or just try to get an answer from them, the audience reaction would always be quite negative, noticeably more negative than when Peter had taken somebody on.
But could this be, or one of the explanations, or an additional explanation, be the difference in age? Peter is a venerable figure, let us say, and some people think that age brings authority, not in my case. You were relatively young. You don't think that might have been a factor?
It might have been also that I wasn't very good. I think I probably got better, and Peter was certainly more experienced than I was. I don't discount that. But it's interesting, there'd be other things as well, texts along the lines of, "Are you grumpy for a reason?" That sort of thing, which I think all women in broadcasting probably have occasionally.
There are 5 episodes, of course. When you came to choose the women who would be central to each episode, how did you go about it? What were you looking for?
We were looking for a variety of different women, different experiences, different times, and it was pretty difficult to whittle it down. Of course it was. I think as well it's important for programmes like this to bring to the forefront forgotten women. Barbara Mandel is not a name that people know, but she was actually Britain's first female television newsreader, quite a significant part of media history, actually. So I was really glad we were able to include a tiny bit of her. We could only find 11 seconds, but it's there anyway.
Good morning to you. Mr. Macmillan, the Foreign Secretary, left London Airport this morning for Geneva, where the meeting of the 4 foreign ministers resumes today.
Now, why did you choose Jackie Oakley about Match of the Day? What do you think that summed up?
Well, I think that was hugely significant.
For any commentators to do a Match of the Day game is a really big deal, but I didn't think of it in the grand scheme of things in the way that the wider public and the media saw it when it actually happened. Because from my point of view...
People like me, girls like me who'd grown up watching Liverpool and caring passionately about what happened to them, we wouldn't have thought it likely that a woman would get that chance. And I was quite passionate about her inclusion, actually. She did something very significant, and I don't really think she took it on board at the time.
Can we look at where we are today, both in terms of the guests, but first of all in presenters? Because you have written elsewhere, women on the radio, too often they're left as an obliging giggler or sidekick. Is that still the case?
I think if you look at the BBC, maybe not so much, but there are problems still with women presenting programmes on local radio at prime time, and by that I do mean breakfast shows and drive time shows, and we know in fact that Tony Hall is really keen to do something about that. In commercial radio, more women's voices are around, but generally speaking, and I know it's always slightly tricky to generalise, but it will be the man driving the desk. You can always tell that because it's the man on these commercial radio so-called double-headed programmes who introduces the music, picks up at the end of the music, and then there'll be a woman with him, and she does the traffic and travel, and she laughs at the gags. Not always, but a lot of the time.
But in terms of the BBC and Radio 4, I mean, we've got Rita Lashot, obviously confirmed as the main presenter.
And that's great.
Of the 10 o'clock programme. You've got Michelle Hussain now Today programme together with Sarah Montague. Lots of strong, powerful, authoritative women. Has, in your view, Radio 4, as it were, solved the problem?
Well, there's Martha as well, of course, at 1 o'clock.
Of course, yes, 1 o'clock.
So that's great. Solve the problem. I wouldn't say Radio 4 was in the firing line here, really. I think it would be unfair to criticise Radio 4 in this respect. There are problems elsewhere in the BBC during daytime. Radio 2 still lacks a regular female voice between the hours of 7 in the morning and quite late into the evening.
Can I then ask you about what I know you think is still a problem, which is the experts interviewed on programmes, maybe by a woman more frequently than others, but usually the expert being a man. There's a difficult issue here, isn't there? Because if you want the best possible person who's done the research, you should be seeking that person regardless of their sex. And if it is the case, that's a man, too bad.
I agree. I think you should go for the person who knows the most about it. I defend that. I mean, of course we need to hear from them. It's idiotic. We live with them. We live amongst them. I don't want to live in some kind of separatist
No,
state.
there's a section of people who would say, look, it is the case that the majority of experts in particular fields are men. Well, that is because women have not had the opportunity, and therefore you should be not reflecting society in this area, but leading it, helping to change it. Do you think that's your job?
I think it probably is. I think it's a responsibility of any individual like me, and I've had an incredibly fortunate media career in the sense that I owe a great deal to people who've helped me. Actually, many of those people were not female, as it happens. My first boss at the BBC was a man who was brilliantly supportive. Yes, I do feel that I have a responsibility to speak out, which is why I sometimes do on these issues. I have mentees who I try to help as well, who are women. Yes, absolutely. If you can't help other women, then you really should, I think, probably be genuinely quite ashamed if the world has been good to you as it has to me. I just want an even playing field, and I think that's what this series has tried to illustrate, that it hasn't always been easy, but huge progress has been made.
Jane Garvey. Should the BBC reflect society or attempt to change it in the interests of equality? Your thoughts and comments, please. Now, for me, the clock's going back an hour and an early afternoon descent into darkness is no cause for celebration, but there was an unlooked-for bonus for Radio 2 listeners like Dan Whitehouse. Last Saturday, he tweeted,
"Want to know the best thing about the clocks going back? We all get treated to an extra hour of the Whispering Bob's Saturday show."
Whispering Bob, of course, is the incomparable Bob Harris. And the fact that his 3-hour weekly show was due to be 33% longer, running from 12 a.m. BST to 3 a.m. GMT, was indeed a source of joy to his many fans. The man himself sounded quite excited at the prospect.
Well, it's Bob Harris with you now. For the next 4 hours between now and then, there's beauty in the air.
I guess that depends on your definition of beauty, Bob, because an hour later, your show sounded like this.
He's coming from the West End.
Now, let's try and be charitable. Occasional mistakes are made, and they are usually picked up and quickly corrected. But not this time. The two Bobs went on and on and on, in all for another 20 minutes. So what on earth was going on? We asked Radio 2 for an interview to explain. Surprisingly, no one was available to come and talk to me. But the station did send us a statement.
Overnight last Saturday, there were live news bulletins, pre-recorded items and the clocks changing, which simultaneously presented a complicated junction unique to Radio 2 that night. Without getting too technical here, when the clocks changed from 1 a.m. BST to 1 a.m. GMT, the system lost its place in time and got confused. Ultimately, it was a scheduling and operations error. We had prepared for it and believed we had the correct plans in place, but in this instance didn't get it quite right.
Find out. And I remember taking it home and putting it on the website, which is big train, parents being absolutely and that track followed.
The situation was noted shortly after occurring, and whilst the BBC control room was working hard to diagnose and subsequently rectify the problem, they put in place a backup.
Gone quiet, hasn't it? Well, needless to say, it shouldn't really be this quiet. I can assure you we're trying to sort things out at this end, and just as soon as we can, we'll return to our normal schedule here on BBC Radio 2.
Listeners were then treated to some rather un-Bob-like tunes from the likes of ABBA and Ollie Murs, until, just as abruptly, Bob was back, mid-sentence, during an interview with singer-songwriter Nick Capaldi.
In November.
Yeah, we're back at the 12 bar, 28th of November.
Not exactly smooth, and it's not the first time Radio 2 has had problems with its automatic play-out system, introduced to cut costs last year. All rather embarrassing for the station's controller, Bob Shannon, who was on feedback earlier this year, soon after a similar incident, in which Russell Davies and Michael Ball talked over each other for 15 minutes. Here's what Mr. Shannon said at the time.
It was a very serious error. We take it extremely seriously. We know it affected a lot of people's enjoyment of Radio 2. They've told us so. I apologise for that. What I can reassure people about is that we've got to the root cause of the problem and we'll ensure that there's appropriate training support so that we don't make the same mistakes again.
Sorry, Bob, but it sounds like a similar mistake has been made again. What's to stop a reoccurrence?
This was a unique problem specific to that night's output. We're currently transitioning to a new playout system, which will be in place in the next few weeks. And while still a complicated piece of software, it will facilitate the process of scheduling complicated junctions such as this.
I think I understood that. Radio 2 is not saying such overlapping definitely won't happen again, but the new system will facilitate the process. What a relief. Wrong button. Normal service will be resumed same time next week. Goodbye.
Put on a drama that runs over 10 consecutive afternoon drama slots. I think you would have done better to have commissioned 10 new standalone dramas. And I think this is definitely needed because at the moment there are so many repeats.
Hello, I'm Camilla Curti. The classic serial is Evelyn Waugh's Sword of Honour trilogy, which is obviously 3 books being done in 7 parts. So compared with 1 book in 10 parts, I think that's interesting.
In view of those concerns, we called in for questioning Radio 4's commissioning editor for drama, Jeremy Howe. He did not ask to be accompanied by his solicitor, but he did have a minder with him. Having switched on the recorder, I got straight to the point. Some feedback listeners have been riveted, but many more think it's all too much.
My name is Bob Tomlinson from Nelson in Lancashire. I listened with growing disgust to this cheerless yarn detailing, in last Friday's episode, all too graphic army brutality and breaking the spirit of a hapless squaddy. Have I done something wrong to be subjected to this treatment with no escape except the off button?
Hi, this is Roger Bramwell speaking. Without doubt, this was the finest drama I've heard for a long while. And this play was like being transported back in time. References to Freddie Mills, prefabricated housing, diner doors. Really, as a piece of social history, this was totally spot on.
My name is Stephanie Douglas. I think it's indefensible.
This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Can you have too much of a good thing? G.F. Newman is a fine award-winning writer, but was his multi-stranded Radio 4 drama, The Corrupted, full of sex and violence, suitable for 2:15 on half-term afternoons? And was it worth 7 hours of airtime over just 2 weeks? Some listeners think not.
I think it's indefensible to put on a drama that runs over 10 consecutive afternoon drama slots. The afternoon drama slot is for standalone drama.
Radio 4's drama commissioner tells us why he decided to run all 10 parts back-to-back.
I think it's great to give a writer of the stature of Gordon Newman the space, the size of his canvas, to tell it's an epic story.
It's the radio adaptation of a part of his epic novel Crime and Punishment that has dominated Radio 4's airwaves. The drama covers the lives of a family caught up in the criminal underworld of the East End of London in the 1950s. It stars former East Ender Ross Kemp, hardly the shy and retiring type. It's tough stuff. Here's a taste, and those of a sensitive nature might want to put their hands over their ears.
Thank you, I had a shave this morning. You look like you could do with one. Here it is for you. Now sling your hook, before I give you a matching stripe on the other side of your boat.
As I said, strong stuff and inescapable, because for the last 2 weeks the series has taken over the daily afternoon drama slot on Radio 4, normally a forum for one-off play.
And we like epic stories on Radio 4.
Also in feedback this week, a new series on women in broadcasting, past and present. Where are all the strong, authoritative female role models? Well, here's one.
If you can't help other women, then you really should, I think, probably be genuinely quite ashamed if the world has been good to you, as it has to me.
The one and only Jane Garvey. And here are 2 Bob Harris's.
Tracks from 2 of my favourite re-release I've already played this track. Vito, first of all, and Ace.
Why fans of Whispering Bob were hearing double for nearly 20 minutes. Are they all asleep at Radio 2? First, The Corrupted, which some listeners fear their children could be if they listen to G.F. Newman's multi-part radio drama. Mr. Newman is best known for his TV series Law and Order back in the late 70s, and more recently for Judge John Deed. But over the last 2 weeks,